Does Mike all okay? Yes.
Yep.
Excellent, because I am quiet, so Mike's on my friend. Okay, let's enter. So, hello, I am an independent taxonomy consultant. I've been independent for over a decade. I can't really imagine doing anything else, which is either a really good thing or a really bad thing. I've worked across all different kinds of sectors, all kinds of different organisations, big and small, because it seems like everybody struggles with organising their stuff for maximum kind of benefit. It doesn't matter whether that's a kind of multinational consumer goods firm or a little charity. People have the same trouble that their search engines don't work, or people can't find stuff on the websites, or they're not making most of their content. And so the kind of things I work on include sort of information architectures, metadata schemas, digital asset management, content management, intranet, knowledge bases, semantic publishing, which I'll cover a little bit more later on, search, and a little bit of machine learning, text analytics, automatic classification. It's been called a lot of things over the years, but the core principles are basically what my old boss used to describe as teaching computers to read newspapers. We were working for a newspaper at the time. And the common thread among all of those things is I like sorting stuff out. I like helping people maximise their content and data for efficiencies, if people are stuck doing crappy processes or manual tagging, where we could be giving them something a lot cleverer and more scalable, and also just for opportunities to do things in more kind of interesting and in some cases profitable ways. So I had a few kind of fairly light-hearted examples of the kind of stuff I do. So I've worked on various kind of machine learning type stuff, and I used to have to work on stuff indexing company names so that people could find tailored news about those companies. But it was a time when loads of companies were doing ridiculous rebrands kind of in the noughties. And the one that I absolutely hate to this day is a company called If. I think they were spun out of Halifax or something, but they changed their name to If PLC. And that was just impossible for us, exactly. They clearly, I mean, all right, this predated a lot of the SEO stuff, but it was just an absolute nightmare to tell these poor, not very clever computers, go and index If, because it's a really important thing that lots of customers are really interested in, because it's financial services, and you know, they're new, and then, and then later on, I thought I moved away from finance. I was doing more kind of general newsy and entertainment content with the BBC, and I started having to automatically index band names, and lots of them are really, really good for being completely unambiguous. You know, something like Coldplay is only ever Coldplay as far as I can tell. But then this band called The Internet came along. I've never listened to their music on principle. But to end on a kind of good note there, there's a band called Churches where the U is actually a V, where they deliberately chose that to be Googleable and indexable, and I like them. Another sort of silly example, hopefully not too rude, is I've worked for the Metropolitan Police on some of their kind of search and intranet stuff. And I've never worked for an organisation that deals with animals or guns before, never have since. But they had a policy on how to recycle the manure that their horses produced. It's a fairly niche thing, but they sell it to local farms at some of their stables, and they make money from it, so you want people to do it properly. So that's the kind of thing that I went home and told my partner I was working on. Final example, so I was working for a listings magazine, trying to give people recommendations for interesting stuff to do. But in order to do that, we had to model what a weekend was. And that was a really interesting challenge, because when does the weekend start? Like for some people it might be the dead of 5 PM on a Friday. When does it end though? Is it the dead of midnight on Sunday, or is it Sunday morning? It's different cultures, and I was just really lucky to be able to work on quite an interesting sort of cultural challenge. So just to kind of set the scene a bit, this is not a kind of detailed implementation thing. I'm not going to get into particularly technical details because I'm not a developer or a technical architect. I'm not pushing one approach or tool over another. I think of myself a bit as a sort of magpie of knowledge representation tools. That I like taxonomies, I like thesauri, I like authority files, I like knowledge graphs. I just like sorting stuff out, and I like choosing what works for people. So practical, it's not a tutorial. I'm going to give a quick overview of taxonomies, ontologies, and knowledge graphs. Are these things that you're reasonably familiar with, or? Yeah, I can't really do a kind of full thing, but I'll just give the kind of key concepts, and hopefully that'll be enough for you to kind of understand and engage with. And then I'll kind of draw some comparisons between the different tools, their kind of pros and cons, which is what I said I'd do when I kind of gave the talk idea, and draw some general conclusions. So to start with, taxonomies, they are hierarchical tree structures. You would have engaged with taxonomies even if you've never worked explicitly with them. You'd have seen them in libraries on, Amazon or eBay, or in supermarkets when you've browsed an aisle. Someone has thought about where to put those things, whether they're books or products or digital resources. So that's in a nutshell what it is. There's the way that it works is it's hierarchical tree structure, and what's called the parent-child relationships are called explicitly in information science broad terms and narrow terms. So, for example, Paris might be a child term, a narrow term of France. I'll skip a bit about the different kinds of narrow terms because it might not be that relevant if you're not that familiar. And it's also got the idea of related terms. Now, unlike formal ontologies and knowledge graphs, those relations aren't named. You literally just say this thing has some kind of relationship with that thing, and that is of some use to you by doing that. So on a website, that might be related products or related articles. In a supermarket kind of setup, it might be, when you're buying tortilla chips, it'll suggest that you buy the dips with it because someone has explicitly made that link. Another really sort of important part of taxonomies, a really kind of rich area that's often overlooked, is the idea of synonyms or kind of alternative or equivalent words for things. And that's most useful in search because we know that humans aren't very neat in the way they search for things or they think of things. And our job as kind of IT or taxonomy or information professionals is to try and help get them to where they need to be, even if they haven't searched for something in sort of the correct way. So a couple of very random examples. So my football team is nicknamed the Bees. So people might search for the Bees, but we want to point them at Brentford FC and also other teams that are nicknamed the Bees. But those two words are basically synonymous in the taxonomy. One's the proper name of the team and one's its nickname. This example over here is, anyone know who this is? Thank you. So she writes under the pen name Robert Galbraith for all sorts of reasons. But if I was working on a kind of newspaper or news agency, we would want to have a link between those two concepts so that we could aggregate stuff about that person. quick note on SKOS, which is the Simple Knowledge Organisation System, which is basically a taxonomy for taxonomies. So it's the kind of structured way that you model a taxonomy. So the broad term, narrow term, related terms, they've all got SKOS statements, and there's all sorts of other things that you can do, but that is well beyond the scope of what we can do tonight. But I think the development of SKOS has been a really useful thing for helping organisations understand the value of taxonomies and being able to reuse and apply them in all sorts of different places, so that they kind of get out of their little silos being managed by librarians and actually become really crucial business assets. So the great thing about ontologies is they're really hard to define. I'll make sure you get all the slides, but that's a really good blog link where someone has just gone looking for, a nice, easy 1 or 2 line of what the hell is an ontology, and they've ended up going in circles, and Wikipedia links back to itself, and Google isn't very helpful either. Because I'm not a computer scientist or a philosopher, so it's hard for me to kind of encapsulate. But I basically see it as a way of modelling classes, relationships, and attributes or metadata about those classes or things. So again, I think it's quite natural for humans to think in terms of this thing is related to this thing. My car is black. It's got 4 doors, that is a class with attributes. But this just formalises it, and you put it into systems and data systems, and suddenly you can start doing really interesting stuff with it. So it's good for modelling a particular domain, it's good for validating data, constraining a particular set of data or content, and it can be used behind all sorts of databases, content systems, DAM systems, and it's really kind of picked up traction in the last few years. It's been around for a long time, but finally it's sort of seeping through to the wider kind of information professional community that I'm sort of most active in. I'm sure that kind of hardcore IT people would be possibly a little bit more familiar. So as I said, the basic components are classes, which are just basically concepts of things, and obviously there's a lot of decision making that you have to do when you start thinking about how am I going to define those classes. So I'm oversimplifying things a little bit, and I've been in lots of really turgid meetings in my life where people have argued about things that I thought were very minor in ontology design. But actually they were arguing about it for a reason. So unlike taxonomies, the relations can be named anything that you want. So I can never think of an example at this point. But yeah, a bit like, can you do it for relation? I don't know. But yeah, you can name the relations and store them in a system. And I think the really kind of killer idea for me around ontologies is the URI, the Uniform Resource Identifier, which gives a unique ID to every component of the ontology, whether it's a class, a relation, or an attribute, and probably other bits around it. And that is really, really powerful, because that really opens up systems in kind of a really clever way. You can do that with taxonomies, but traditionally it's not been done. And I think that is changing with some of the software and stuff that I'll cover later on. So URIs are machine readable. They ideally should not really have anything that a human would care about. That, it has a little bit that looks like a URL, and then ideally, in my opinion, it should just be an alphanumeric string. Leave that bit to the machines. rather than trying to put the name of a class or a concept in there, which is, it's fine, but what happens if that concept changes its name for some reason, which happens all the time. Like I've worked on kind of video game stuff, and video games change their name from when they're first conceived to when they're finally released to the public. So what do? You're then stuck with a meaningless string in the URI when you should have just had all the hashes instead. URIs. And the other powerful kind of aspect of this is the RDF. Is anyone familiar with RDF? Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's really good because that gives you a huge amount of expressiveness in how you define relations between things. There's subject, predicate, object, construct. You can plug literally anything into there. And then you can store it in a triple store, and there's various ones on the market. And you can query that and do really cool stuff with it. So, on to knowledge graphs. Again, great fun to define. You can't see that very well, but you'll see it on the slides afterwards. So basically that was a paper where someone had tried to find, again, a nice pithy definition for a knowledge graph and came up with 5 that none of them are really satisfactory in my view. They're all a little bit mangled. I guess I see it as things, not strings. So taxonomies are all about controlling language. But knowledge graphs really give you the power of semantic definition of things that have URIs and they have facts or content attached to them. I guess people would possibly have first come across them when Google started doing the knowledge panels. Does this look familiar to people? And this was really nice for all of us that work in structured data and taxonomies, because suddenly I could point to that and say, look, there's this really cool thing that you use. This is what I've been trying to do for years. But basically that just pulls in lots of publicly curated data from Wikipedia and other sources, and then puts it in a really nice, kind of readable, friendly way that you can use in your search results for whatever you need to do. And you can click in between all of those things, so it's much more like the semantic web vision that I think a lot of us almost kind of grew up with over the last few decades, which never quite went anywhere until it really got kind of commercialised and turned into something more kind of consumer friendly, I think. So, as I say, at the heart of a knowledge graph should be an ontology, because you need a schema, you need to define the limits of the domain that you're modelling, otherwise you're probably not working in a very optimal way. Like if you're working on a movie website, at some point you need to stop worrying about stuff that isn't movies or entertainment based. And you can link things to facts or directly to content. And that's what makes these kind of more powerful than ontologies, because ontologies on their own are a little bit abstract, but this sort of stuff is really real, because I can kind of explain that to people who don't work in our kind of field at all, and they get it. So having a knowledge graph gives you the ability to query, the ability to reason, increasingly to draw inference, and to power kind of AI programs. And I like this quote, relations are the first-class citizens. And I believe first-class citizens is a programming term, but I interpret it in a more general way. I think the real power of what you find in a knowledge graph is these relationships. Like when you use IMDb, being able to see, who starred in a particular film and then click and see what else that person starred in, and oh, they co-starred with this person who was on that thing on TV that you really liked, and just being able to kind of bounce around as a human, and also machines can do that. So after the kind of Google knowledge graph got traction, people like Airbnb and Facebook and LinkedIn got into it, and that has also been really helpful because suddenly everybody is saying, build me something a bit like Airbnb have got. Okay, do you actually need that? But it kind of helped open the door a little bit. So I'd sort of summarise the power of knowledge graphs as enabling you to connect content to content, content to people, and people to people. And that's people within the knowledge graph, or people as in consumers themselves. So what all these lovely structures that I'm really passionate about, what's the value, what are the pros and cons of doing things in any particular way? So starting with kind of interoperability, taxonomies are really easy to share, and that's partly a function of the fact that they're a little bit more low-tech than the knowledge graphs. They're a bit less heavy to maintain. You know, you can maintain taxonomy as a spreadsheet, although I really don't like it when people do that. And you can easily send that round to people and they can see what's in your taxonomy. It's really easy. The mapping together of taxonomies is relatively straightforward because you've only got so many kinds of relations. You've got the broad term, the narrow term, the related term, and the synonym. There's a few kind of minor ones, but it's a lot easier to try and find equivalents between Paris in one taxonomy and Paris in another. And then once you add in the SCOS standard, if you've got two taxonomies marked up in SCOS, that's even easier to be able to automatically make those connections if you've got the right software. So ontologies can be mapped. I've not actually done it myself. The risk is always keeping them in sync, especially if you've got something that grows to be a bit complicated over time. I think that's a real challenge because I've worked on projects where people had ontologies internally, and it was really difficult for them to map because of the complexity and the way that they kind of diverged over time. So it's not something that I'd sort of say to people, yeah, rush in, you do that. But clearly people might have a need at some point. In my opinion, knowledge graphs are not really being shared that much yet. I'd be happy to discuss it with anyone who has better experience of it than me, but I think knowledge graphs are being built by really big corporates. They're really proprietary. Yeah, it's a big investment. It's people's competitive advantage. It's not quite the same ethos as, say, linked data, when people were a lot more open about bunking their data sets into the kind of linked open data cloud. Maybe that will kind of evolve, but we don't really know. So then I started thinking about the rate of change of all these different models. So a taxonomy needs to control language, and of course that doesn't mean it should be set in ASPIC, because it will become obsolete despite your kind of best efforts. But on the other hand, volatility is bad for end users. If they're going into, say, a CMS and they've got a drop down of a bunch of tags or publishing statuses and it's called something completely different this week to last week, that's not going to help them have confidence and trust in the system, and they probably won't do the metadata properly. So it's always a kind of fine balance to strike there. So the ideal progression for ontologies is that they change a little bit over time, but not too much. Ideally people would try and think of all scenarios when they first set up the model, rather than, oh gosh, we've left out something really important and we're going to have to refactor a lot of systems that have got a lot of dependencies. You should try and set out and build the strongest foundation possible from the outset. But sometimes changes are needed. You might be working for like an e-commerce company and they've got a whole new product line, or a whole load of really detailed products where they used to only sell shoes and now they're getting into sandals and summer shoes and winter boots, that sort of thing. So again, it should never kind of not change. I think that's a risk too. And finally, the knowledge graphs. They should be reasonably dynamic, depending on what the domain is, of course. I'm sure people like IMDb are adding new facts every single second because there's an awful lot of stuff out there. But the underlying schema that everything is built on should be reasonably stable. So as per what we were saying about ontologies. So I do a lot of quizzing, and that's basically building a mental knowledge graph in your head. And facts do change even when you don't expect them to. So earlier this year, the capital of Burundi in Africa changed, and all my quizzing friends were like, oh God, we spent years trying to learn this place. We've got our little methods for remembering it because it comes up, because it's a bit obscure. And now we've got to remember a completely different one. And capital cities you think are reasonably static and you can just learn a list of them, but no, the world does not sit still for us. So when I started thinking about the differences in how you would do governance optimally on the three different things, I realised it was all kind of the same at the sort of strategic level. They all need oversight. They're not just something that you code up or leave in a spreadsheet and bosh, there you go. They all have to have kind of active stewardship by people who kind of know what they're doing, and that can often be a challenge in organisations when people leave or experts get moved to different projects, or sometimes what happens is I go into somewhere as a consultant, do something that leaves them a baseline I think is really good, and then I leave and they haven't put anything in place to kind of look after it over time, and 2 years later they're like, yeah, it's really bad now, sorry, told you. So it's not just sort of build and forget, if you have anything like this. And I think the same is true of probably some of the kind of data management solutions and principles that you're probably more familiar with. That's not my kind of core sort of world. You need to be thinking, are they still meeting user needs? Are they still fit for purpose? Are there better ways of doing things that have come along since then? So it's a business asset, like any IT solution or approach. And again, it's about managing dependencies. So I was working for an educational publisher who wanted to make changes to their ontology, but they had integrated the ontology with so many different systems and not kept any sort of record of it, that it was a real challenge finding those stakeholders and those consuming applications to be able to communicate to them, guys, you need to update the systems because we've got some new changes coming through. And in the end it was just, we had to break stuff and then they complain, and that's how we found the stakeholders. So it was a teachable moment, I think they call it. So governance is really important, and I always tell people that, especially being a consultant, it's not just about doing the fun bit of building, it's having a long-term plan in place for making sure this still works for you. closely associated with the governance is the ease of maintenance. And as I've kind of been stressing, taxonomies need reviewing, they need auditing, new terminology comes along. Just thinking back to my kind of newspaper days, a concept like prorogation. Obviously, prorogation of parliaments existed for hundreds of years, but no one's really cared about it before. Suddenly it's getting massively discussed in all sorts of facets of court cases and process and law and general politics. So people need to be kind of thinking about that sort of thing. And the sort of flip side of that is terminology becomes obsolete. I've worked for some kind of healthcare clients who had taxonomies of conditions, and they had to be really careful to make sure they were always labelling and displaying the most kind of appropriate term for things. I think there's a lot of terminology around like mental health and learning difficulties that you just don't use anymore because it's really offensive. And taxonomies need to kind of keep up to date with that sort of thing. With ontologies, it's our old friend dependencies again, and getting input from those kind of non-technical stakeholders. I think in my own experience has been that it's difficult for people to engage with ontologies because it's a big technical diagram. Even if they get the idea of it and the purpose of it, sometimes they just glaze over a little bit. So it's up to the people who are working on that project to kind of support and guide so that they get the right information from those stakeholders, again, so that the ontology meets the business needs. And that only gets ratcheted up when you've got knowledge graphs. So I'm kind of seeing that when you've got multiple kind of content models and taxonomies and things that are feeding into a knowledge graph, you're suddenly creating lots of complexity. And I think there's quite a lot to be learned by the industry over the next few years in terms of managing and governing knowledge graphs properly rather than just letting them do their own thing. Doing okay for time away? So I've touched on this quite a bit, but I thought I'd have a kind of dedicated slide on it because I think it's really important. So the relations between different things in a taxonomy, ontology or knowledge graph, there's the really key differences that would influence, if you were setting out on a project, which of these you might choose in order to meet particular use cases that you have. So as I say, the taxonomy has limited semantic expressiveness. It's a bunch of words with a few ways that you can relate them together. But if the priority is controlling a vocabulary or terminology or populating a drop-down, that might be okay. And I think you can use taxonomies within, wider kind of ontologies and knowledge models in order to give you those kind of lists, those controlled lists, and it doesn't matter that the taxonomy itself doesn't have much semantic expressiveness because it's being plugged into something that is. So as I say, in the ontologies, it's all named relations. You can call them anything you like. You can make them one-directional or bi-directional, and like a traditional relational database management system, you can set the cardinality. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. And knowledge graph is the most semantically rich of all of these things, as you'd expect. It's a bit of a trend throughout the presentation. So you've got the facts, the instances, and you've got connections directly to other documents or other data sources or directly to content, and that's what makes knowledge graphs different from the other two. It makes it more rich, but also more complicated. So, sorry you can't see that properly, don't worry about it, I will explain what it's about. So a bit on machine learning or AI or whatever your buzzword of choice is. Taxonomies are really useful because they disambiguate, they qualify concepts that have the same name. You might have lots of John Smiths, or for disambiguation I sometimes use the example of the guy called John Lewis, whose Twitter handle is just John Lewis. And every Christmas he gets loads of grief from people because they've seen the Christmas ad, they don't like it for whatever reason, and they just go on Twitter and ping John Lewis. So obviously a taxonomy can't fix that, but that shows you the kind of thing that can go wrong. And clearly people just need to look at his Twitter bio when it's very clear he says, "I'm not the shop." He's very nice about replying to people for some reason like that. Maybe he just enjoys the attention, but yeah, John Lewis. And again, the machine learning is really helped by the synonyms within a taxonomy, because it sort of bootstraps it and says, here's a thing, here's 5 other things that strings that mean exactly the same thing. So the machine learning can then understand without having to do any extra work that when they see the synonym in the text that it's actually that thing. The Brentford Bees example or the Robert Galbraith. So ontologies and knowledge graphs are really powerful. There's lots of really exciting work going on at the moment in terms of sort of inference, of drawing out facts and stuff that aren't immediately obvious to people, but they're contained within the data. You know, you can use these to query big systems like Wikipedia. So if I wanted to know all the countries that have changed their capital city in the last 2 years, I could do that by querying Wikipedia, even though it possibly doesn't have an explicit page, but it's got all the data connected to it. I'm not explaining this very well because we've got quite a lot to get through, but just the takeaway is that you can do a lot of really interesting queries when you've got this heavily structured data with loads of interconnections with other models and other databases. I always say that machine learning is not magic. I've always been a bit sceptical. I think sometimes that's quite a healthy quality. So that is a screenshot I took at a conference last week, which I'm one of these annoying people that waggles their phone around and then it doesn't quite come out. But basically, this guy is running a database of data sets around human genes and data about them. And he found 31 different ways in which people refer to age, like literally the age of the patient or whoever within the data. So you've got sort of age, comma, year, age, years, age of patient. You've got all those different variants, and we can look at that list of 31 and go, oh yeah, they're all age. But a computer has no chance until we give it that support. And yeah, this was another thing that came out last week, because I think QI tweeted about it, that 1 in 5 data sets about genes have errors in because Excel has converted the gene name to a date, and no one has picked that up and the data has been published without that. Now the actual story is a tiny bit more nuanced than that, but as a data quality pedant, I kind of leapt on that as like, that is mad. And that is going to make it a lot harder for machine learning to identify the correct gene if it's looking at a data set and it thinks it's saying September the 2nd and actually it's a gene called SEP2. So, I think this general point about the human role of intelligence and our understanding of the world in guiding these systems, rather than thinking that we'll just program these systems and they'll do all the hard work for us. I do think we need quite a lot of oversight, and I think there's big societal issues about who gets to do AI, particularly, you know, a very small proportion of people who work in AI are women, so what kind of gender biases are we getting in, you know, that sort of issue. So the basic kind of practical point here is that machine learning needs those structures and those training documents in order to understand stuff in the way that we can do pretty naturally. It's not clear, but I shall talk you through the example. So the point I want to make here is that we've all engaged with taxonomies and controlled lists. If we've ever used a drop-down on a website or on a form, that's fairly well understood. But most people don't directly interact with ontologies or knowledge graphs yet. So this is an example. I worked on a project with a news agency where we wanted journalists to be adding structured data to create triples to put in a triple store, but they're not developers. We don't want them to be developers, and we also didn't want to hold up their actual publishing processes. So with a team of designers and developers and information people, they built this interface that you could start typing, but also complete if it found something in Wikipedia. So, and if it did, it would automatically start populating a whole bunch of data through, and saying that Douglas Engelbart has this identifier in Wikipedia, he's got this identifier in Freebase as it was then, and they could assign a proprietary identifier from the agency so that we could use that in our systems. And all that takes a matter of seconds. But under the hood, it's all this lovely sort of ontology stuff, creating all this massive of triples, bosh, and the journalists never see that. So it's one of the things I'm most kind of proud of, that we hid a lot of complexity, but did some really cool stuff. Software is a huge topic, so I'm going to skirt over it, so sorry if you're sort of hoping for something a bit more detailed. Taxonomy management software is quite a mature market now. There's been a lot of consolidation, so there's only a few kind of big players, but they're really, really good. So I think a lot of the kind of lower end people have gone. A lot of them have got really kind of good graphical UIs, so it's a lot easier to manipulate data, move data, link it to other places, without particularly having to be a coder and without having to use interfaces that look like they came out in the 1980s. So that's been quite a good trend. So some of the names here, obviously I'm completely vendor agnostic. People like Semantica, Party, Data Harmony, Smart Logic, Multitest, and Netrix, who used to be concept searching, and there's more that I've missed off. So these are sort of the leading people in this field. With ontologies, the two that I'm most familiar with are Protege and Workbench. Protege is impossible to use, but once you get it going, it's amazing. Has anybody used it? No, okay.
I tried.
Yeah. Workbench is a partly EU-funded thing that came out of Italian universities. Again, that's quite a tricky interface because it's not particularly intuitive, but under the hood it does really smart things, and I think once you go through the learning curve and frustration, it can be really good. I'm sure there's other sort of scientific and technical applications, because it's the sort of thing that big kind of research projects might build themselves, and I know there's startups involved in this sort of area, but I guess my bias is, as an information professional who's not a developer, not a technical architect, I just want something that's nice to use and lets me do the stuff that I care about and not have to think too much about the interface. Knowledge graphs, that's quite an exciting area. I think there's a lot kind of coming along. So lots of the taxonomy tool companies are adding capability and features and usability features, and I think that's really going to be quite fast moving over the next couple of years. There's also kind of smaller companies getting into this market because they see that knowledge graphs are going to have a lot of potential, and they're trying to offer good solutions that people can get up and running with. Neo4j are a really big name in kind of graph databases, and there's also the NoSQL databases, which I've not really worked with that much, and again, they're not particularly intuitive, but I think, I don't know, if people like them, great. They don't particularly meet my needs as someone who wants to manipulate models. So, conclusions. So I think these are really exciting times for knowledge representation. I've had so many conversations kind of earlier in my career of, oh, why do we need a taxonomy? We just get Google to do it, or people can just do their own tagging. And now there's a lot more corporate interest because people are seeing the benefit of it. There's lots more job ads for people in all sorts of roles and disciplines working with kind of knowledge models. The software's got a lot better, and I see it as a kind of evolution of the semantic web that had loads of fantastic ideas and is now breaking through into kind of applications that are more everyday understandable, in my opinion. So the second point probably fits most IT projects. Don't build a solution in need of a problem. Don't chase buzzwords. Don't add the sort of complexity if you don't need it. Just be really, really focused. I've actually said to clients who ask me to help them with knowledge graphs, I've actually said, no, you actually just need a taxonomy for this. If you want to scale up in the future, good, do it, but don't invest in all of this when actually what you said you need is this, and that's what you budgeted for. So I think people need to kind of rein in some of the kind of hype a little bit. Mixing and matching is helpful. You don't need to say, oh, I'm only going to do this or only going to do this. You might well have combinations of these. So you might need a taxonomy to control vocabulary for a particular class of an ontology, and that helps you to do machine learning and pull in some facts for a knowledge graph. So I think just keeping generally an open mind about how you approach things. And I will bang on again about governance and looking after models properly, not just the build and forget, but having proper processes to make sure that they're still relevant and doing what they need. So, nearly there. So I just want to plug the conference which I'm the chair of, Taxonomy Bootcamp London, where we discuss a lot of these themes in a lot of detail, which has passion. We're now in our 4th year, so next month at Kensington Olympia. We've got 50 speakers, 4 workshops covering people who want to start from absolute scratch of, oh my god, my boss has told me to build a taxonomy, right through to here's how you turn an ontology into a knowledge graph, which is quite an advanced level. There's lots of networking, look, happy people drinking. And there's various discounts available, so the early bird has just passed, but I can give you discounts, or there's different ones if you're a member of particular associations. That is the end of the advert. And yeah, I'd be really keen to hear your questions, your own experiences in this area. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Helen. That was really, really useful. Good, come through the subject. I'll probably probably open up the question, or just throw it open to everybody else in the room, but it'd be interesting that if you took a bright subject matter expert, a taxonomy ontology type expert, put them in a room together with a blank sheet of paper, they could define what they think they need. But presumably also you could use various automated tools to trawl what you've got, to try and create. So how do you sort of balance, or get the right balance from starting with a blank sheet of paper that might take ages and not reflect what you've got, or the tool-based approach, which then in effect encodes all the bad practice you've had over the years? Is there a balance? Is there an approach there?
So what do you mean by a tool-based approach that encodes?
Just potentially using, if you're doing data queries, trawling your data sets to say what words do we get linked to each other, what concepts, what things do we get relating to each other.
You mean knowledge inference from the data?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess sort of associated with that is how do you account for bias? Because you might have lots of data, you might think data is really neutral, but there might be bias in it. I think you just have to have a high degree of awareness that what you're working from might be a bit flawed, but it's going to get you a long way.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people have that dilemma of, do I build a taxonomy from scratch or do I buy one in? And it's fine to buy one in, but you need to check it to see, is it missing huge subject areas that we're going to need? Is it using terminology that might be appropriate if it's come from America or something, but won't make any sense to UK customers?
Or that you've got particular specialisms that might not be reflected, you have to add them in.
Exactly. Yeah, I think this is the real human value of this though. Not seeing data as kind of neutral and cold, but seeing it as a reflection of how it was created in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think it is exciting. There is a lot of good tools that, as you say, can bootstrap you, but of course, I would argue, you still need the kind of information professional and the subject matter people, whether they're salespeople or scientists or whatever, to really kind of point you in the right direction. And that's the fun bit, really.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about scenarios where it could be in health, it could be in finance, where you have indexes, structures which have to be translated from American, say, to the UK. And you do that, and everybody understands you have to do that work. But they forget that it changes over time. You were referring earlier to the fact that these things can be volatile, they can change over time. The makeup of the FTSE, for example, changes over time, for example. Have you experience of being in this scenario where the budget has already been shut and agreed, and you say, yes, but we need this extra functionality to accommodate the ability, the fact that this changes over time, and how have you justified that to get the money?
Yeah, I mean, you can take a sort of risk-based approach. You can try and have a narrative that says, if the labels on our website are really rubbish, we're not going to sell products because people won't understand it. They'll switch off, they'll go to a competitor. I'll try and be pragmatic and see what I can do within the limitations of sort of budgets. This happens quite a lot. Yeah, I think if there's competitors in a particular industry that are doing good stuff, I think it's sometimes useful to kind of point to that and say, well, look, all their labels are correct and people are engaging with it, so why aren't we? Why are we not investing in something that people need to use? If it's internal people or kind of end users, whether they're customers or whoever.
I'm just imagining you're probably at the sharp end of this. They've brought you or someone like you in, and you turn around and tell them, actually, you need a lot more.
Yeah, and I don't always win. Particularly with kind of search applications, that people do not treat search with the same seriousness as they do finance systems or HR systems, even though it's something that everybody within an organisation probably has to use. And if it's really poor, then it has clear effects on people's productivity and their ability to follow the correct processes or find the right information to make them useful. I think it's about finding stories, and if you can kind of have a narrative around numbers as well, Sometimes those are a bit contrived, but I think just attacking it from lots of different angles. And if there really is no money because like it's a small charity or it's someone's going through a bigger restructuring, you've just got to find the kind of the MVP of what you can do. You know, you can't necessarily make wholesale changes to the search system, but you can still be looking at search logs or talking to content authors, for example, to use that particular example.
Okay, good. More questions? Martin?
Yes, I'm interested, I found your whole talk very interesting. My background is more in formal systems, and I relate most closely to what you say about ontology. But it seems to me it's useful to see a distinction between the more formal things and the more text-oriented side of things. But I'd be interested if you can say something about actually getting taxonomies right. In the sense of if it's formal systems and it's an ontology, you actually need careful methods for making sure you get that right.
Sure.
And I think in what I saw of looking to put together the taxonomy, I thought was a real challenge there. Because you're very dependent on that first level in the hierarchy, and if that changes, sort of cascading down. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so you're kind of asking generally about validation or reviewing or auditing. Yeah, it's difficult. I don't think any taxonomy is ever perfect. It's almost like the minute it's finished, it probably started going out of date. But that's okay because you have to have a baseline somewhere. I think as part of the governance process, you check in with stakeholders or through user testing and check in, is that still meeting people's needs? You get feedback continually. You might do research, so if it's looking at search logs to see are people still calling something this rather than this. And I think it's just a sort of continuous improvement. That's what I would really advocate for. It's very tempting to say, right, it's done, hurrah, we're off down the path, and that's fine, but then at some point you have to come back and just keep kind of checking it, because the kind of systems I often work with, they're digital, they are very dynamic. It's not a library card catalogue, which probably doesn't have the same rate of change.
So building, just build.
Sorry, we'll get Mark first, and then you.
Sorry.
Just in terms of that sort of, I quite like that going down the pub as a sort of waterfall approach. Have you had any problems with agile and wanting to get to a minimum product very quickly? That sort of kicking decisions around taxonomy down the road because they don't affect the current release, and how you balance an agile team wanting to crack on, and you'll say, well, just if we're not careful, we don't sort this, then we're going to have storage problems later. Right.
Yeah, I've worked on various different agile setups. I think the key thing is to make sure that the foundations are correct. So, yeah, I know what you mean about that kind of, everything has to be done in 2 weeks, and the taxonomist going, but I need another 6 to do this. But as long as the kind of setup is clear, like you have software to put the taxonomy into, you have some means of getting it into the systems that it needs to be in, then you can do stuff in parallel with the wider thing, but the kind of technical development of that should be agile, and the taxonomist needs to be involved with that. They can't just sit in the corner and do the fun stuff. They have to be involved with setting up the database or making sure the servers are correct, making sure the developers understand what's coming. If the developers build something and think, oh, the taxonomy is only going to have 3 levels and you're merrily building something with 7, that's going to cause a problem later on. So I think it's just working really tightly within those teams and making sure that you're heard.
Sorry, Tim.
Yeah. So building on a comment from this learned person on my left, who just happens to be my father, but that's completely beside the point. what's your professional opinion on situations where you're then looking to gather user input and once built the taxonomy, clearly trying to drive answers towards that list, and whether the user should always be given the option of saying other and explaining what they believe the answer they want to give you is.
Oh, like, do you mean specifically on sort of drop downs on forms?
So, just happens to be going down another generation in my family. Conversation with my daughter on WhatsApp yesterday was filling in her UCAS form and asking me what my job title is. And when I told her enterprise architect, she came back and said, "I can't. There isn't that in the list." And she came back with all sorts of other architects, none of which I wish to be associated with. And in the end, I said management consultant instead.
Well, that sounds like a bit of a flaw on their part then.
Yeah.
But surely they could get something off LinkedIn or...
Oh, they had a very long list of other things. They had data architect, information architect, but not enterprise architect. So, but yeah, I mean, in that scenario, do you advocate having other as an option in order to get the feed? Because you talked about search logs and so on.
Yeah.
Clearly, a comment box at the very least gives the option, gives the opportunity to retrieve additional insight from what the user community is actually understanding.
Because I think you're then almost showing the humility to say we don't know every job title that's possible in the country. Because enterprise architects is not that niche.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, so I'm quite surprised. Yeah, I would always give that option for other, and you know, you can
I
see
think
that in
probably
things.
if you do that, you then need to be monitoring how often
Yeah.
are people using it, what values are they using, do they feed into the
But to me, that's a good part of the feedback loop. Because if you're getting loads and loads of others,
thinking, you know, being briefed or brought in to do one particular piece of work, and then when you've actually started, you know how transitioning, how long it can take a couple of weeks to maybe start a contract, and then the whole thing is actually completely different from what you expected.
yeah, it happens.
Percentage?
I don't know, because I duck and dive, I do different things.
Yeah. But it happens a lot.
Yeah, maybe a third, and that's really fun, yeah. But as long as you can feel like you're doing something tangibly to help, I'm kind of okay with that. Because sometimes people will come to me, they don't know exactly what they need, and as long as they care that I give them advice to try and help them, maybe that's all right. Sometimes they ask for my advice and say ignore me anyway.
Good. Gentleman over here.
Do you have any methods or tools or techniques for actually sort of saying how good your ontology is? You know, because you can design. It's easy to design a bad ontology.
Yeah.
How can you say, well, this is good, this is bad? Do you have any measure on that, or how is it sort of like?
For me, it's so dependent on how it's going to be used. I would find it quite hard just to look at an ontology and say, yeah, that's cool. Or
But can you,
that's
is
not
there anything you
gonna
can
work.
do with this, with the page or in the ontology, say, right, and make some kind of, do you understand, even if it's just
Yeah.
a test, is there any sort of test
Yeah.
you can do to say, right, okay, this proves that this is a good ontology, or this ontology is not really very good,
Wait.
it could be better? Do you understand what
I
I'm
understand
making sense? Sorry, I'm not
what-
sure if I'm making any sense.
No, you are making sense, and probably in sort of some areas of science they may have methods for doing that. I think because I tend to work in kind of commercial sectors or even sort of public sector, it's not really until you've got it working and the data flowing that we can really evaluate if it's actually done what it's supposed to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of success criteria? So that's one. You know, do you have to sort of, do you have to sort of sign-off condition to say, well, it should? If you're a contractor, you know, you usually have to sort of sign off that it's actually succeeded. So I'm pushing it here.
Yeah. Again, it's down to the dependencies that I can think I've built a really good taxonomy or ontology, but until it's out there in the wild, being used by people, the users might still come back and say they hate it, they can't use it, they can't find what they need. You know, it might not work for a particular website or application. So it's not really until that point.
Try it, so.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't really
No, it's fine.
answered the question.
Yeah,
I'm sure
well,
there
the
are
idea about fitness for
methodologies.
purpose probably is key thing. So if the end users can use it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's right. Whereas you could probably put a number of different ontology experts in a room, might
No, you get sort of
they argue that this one should be like that one.
Yeah.
So
But
do you
if the
tend
end
to,
user can't follow it.
apologies, so do you tend to then develop these things iteratively to see like how it works with users and
Ideally, yeah. It may not always be possible on a project, but yeah, it should be done iteratively so that you don't run a long way with something that is clearly wrong. I think maybe with some sort of scientific application, someone will be able to look at that and say that relation is wrong. You've related that particular medical condition to a part of the body that's completely irrelevant or doesn't affect women and you said it does or something. So if you've got that, if there's a kind of accuracy measure, but for selling shoes and books, it's how are people able to buy books?
So I think we've got time for about one more question, then we'll have a break. So, lady just here.
Yeah, sorry, I actually have a question that is related to this discussion, and it seems to me that surely, if there was to be any correctness test, it's less about the content and more about the structure and flexibility. So it's not necessarily whether this particular relation is correct, but whether you have the structure that is flexible enough that can cope with the situation when you discover incongruity or incorrectness. I would apply something, I have my own little measure that I apply to a variety of things that I work on, which I call the paradigm shift test, which to me is name your fundamental assumptions and then break them. What would happen if your fundamental assumptions, your whole knowledge base changed? Would your ontology allow you to cope with it, and how easily? And if the answer is yes, then I think you have a good ontology in terms of structure, if not necessarily the content. The content is all about expert knowledge, isn't it?
It's probably good to think about how can I break this ontology? How can I break all the kind of chains that are dependent on it? That's probably not a bad kind of mindset to have. Because I think sometimes people get carried away, they build an ontology, it looks nice when it's drawn out on the wall, and go off and code it. And yeah, it's a living thing, and it has to be kind of stress tested against whatever you're trying to make it do.
That's good, great, thank you. So I think what we'll do is we can break now formally, we'll carry on the conversation and do some wine, some crisps outside, but just join me in thanking Helen for